I found out about the break-in from my phone while sitting in a dentist's waiting room 300 miles away in Portland, Oregon. The notification flashed across my screen at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in late January. Silent alarm triggered at Mountain View Cabin. County Sheriff notified. My stomach dropped. I had installed that system specifically because the cabin sat isolated in the Cascade foothills near Government Camp, accessible only by a winding private road that became treacherous in winter. The alarm was expensive, state-of-the-art, and connected directly to the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. I paid a premium for that direct line because standard security companies couldn't guarantee response times in such a remote location. I immediately called Sheriff Deputy Martinez, whose number I had programmed into my contacts when I purchased the cabin 2 years ago. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Williams, we're already en route to your property," he said before I could speak. "Got the alarm notification about 5 minutes ago. We had a unit nearby responding to a weather-related incident, so we should be there in about 10 minutes. Any idea what triggered it?" I asked, anxiety building in my chest. "Not yet. Could be anything from a broken window to someone trying to force the door. The system shows entry through the front door specifically. We'll assess and call you back." I canceled my dental appointment and sat in my truck in the parking lot, heater running, waiting for the callback. Snow had been falling steadily in the mountains for 3 days straight. The weather reports showed Government Camp had received over 2 feet, with another storm system moving in tonight. I had planned to drive up this weekend to check on the place, maybe do some skiing at Mount Hood Meadows, but now I was considering leaving immediately. 23 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mr. Williams, this is Deputy Martinez. We've secured your property and have someone in custody." "Someone broke into my cabin." My voice came out louder than I intended. "Yes, sir. A woman. She claims she's from your homeowners association and has authority to enter your property. Says her name is Patricia Henderson, president of the Mountain Ridge HOA. I felt my jaw clench. Patricia Henderson. Of course it was her. "Deputy, I need to be very clear about something. Patricia Henderson has absolutely no authority to enter my property. None. My cabin isn't even part of any HOA. I specifically purchased land outside the Mountain Ridge development to avoid exactly this kind of situation." There was a pause. "She's insisting she has the right to inspect properties for code violations and weather damage. She's demanding we release her and claiming harassment." "Don't release her," I said firmly. "I want to press full charges for breaking and entering. I'm leaving Portland now. I'll be there in about 2 hours depending on road conditions." "Understood. We'll transport her to the station for processing." "She's extremely agitated and threatening legal action against the department, but we've documented everything." "Your alarm system has cameras, correct?" "Yes, 4 cameras. Interior and exterior. Everything uploads to cloud storage." "Perfect. We'll need access to that footage." "And Mr. Williams, you should know, she didn't just enter your cabin. She made herself quite comfortable. Started a fire in your fireplace, helped herself to your pantry, and was wrapped in one of your blankets on your couch when we arrived." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She broke in to warm up." That's her story. Says her car broke down on the mountain road and she needed shelter. But her vehicle is parked in your driveway, engine cold but showing no signs of mechanical failure. Our assessment is she drove directly to your property with intention to enter." After hanging up, I sat there for a moment processing everything. Patricia Henderson had been a thorn in my side since the day I closed on the cabin. She had shown up 3 weeks after I moved in, clipboard in hand, explaining that while my property wasn't technically within the Mountain Ridge HOA boundaries, It was still subject to their community standards, because it was visible from the development. I had politely but firmly told her that wasn't how property law worked. She had not taken it well. Over the following months, she had sent me letters demanding I paint my cabin a different color because the dark green didn't match their approved palette. She complained about my firewood stack being an eyesore. She tried to cite me for parking my truck in my own driveway because it was a work vehicle with company logos. She even called the county on me, claiming I was running an illegal business from the property because I occasionally worked from the cabin remotely. Every complaint had been dismissed. Every letter I had responded to with documentation from my lawyer explaining that HOA rules didn't apply to non-member properties. But Patricia was nothing if not persistent. The drive up Highway 26 toward Mount Hood was slow going. The roads had been plowed, but snow was falling again, heavy and wet. I passed several cars that had slid off into ditches. My truck handled well with four-wheel drive engaged, but I kept my speed conservative. The last thing I needed was to end up in an accident while rushing to deal with this mess. I used the drive time to call my lawyer, David Chen, who had handled the property purchase and the previous HOA harassment issues. "She actually broke into your cabin." David's voice carried genuine surprise. "That's bold even for her." "Apparently she needed to warm up," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "Though the deputy said her car was working fine." "This is going to backfire on her spectacularly," David said. I could hear him typing. "Breaking and entering, trespassing, potentially burglary depending on what she consumed or damaged. The fact that she's claiming HOA authority makes it even worse because that shows premeditation and a false belief in legal authority she doesn't possess." "I want this to stick," I said. "I'm tired of her harassment. This crosses a line." "Agreed. I'll contact the prosecutor's office and make sure they understand the full context of her previous behavior. This isn't an isolated incident of poor judgment. It's part of a sustained campaign of harassment against you. That matters for charging decisions." "Can I sue the HOA as well?" "Potentially, yes. If we can show the HOA knew about or encouraged her harassment of non-member properties, they could be liable. I'll need to do some research on what their bylaws say about her authority and whether they've enabled this behavior." By the time I reached government camp, the snow was coming down so hard I could barely see 50 feet ahead. The tiny mountain community looked like a scene from a snow globe. The turnoff to my private road was marked by a wooden post I'd installed, and I almost missed it in the whiteout conditions. My cabin sat on 5 acres of heavily forested land about a mile off the main highway. The road leading to it was steep and winding, carved through Douglas firs and hemlocks. I'd paid a significant amount to have it properly graded and maintained, but in weather like this it required careful driving. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I found it occupied by 2 sheriff's vehicles and a silver Mercedes SUV that I recognized as Patricia's. Yellow crime scene tape had been placed across my front door. A deputy I didn't recognize stood on my porch, stamping his feet against the cold. I parked and climbed out, snow immediately stinging my face. The deputy introduced himself as Officer Thompson and handed me a card with a case number. "Deputy Martinez already transported the suspect to the station," he said. "I'm here securing the scene until we finish documentation. We've photographed everything but haven't touched anything inside except to clear the premises." "Can I go in?" "Yes, sir. It's your property. Just be aware we may need you to identify if anything is missing or damaged for the report." The front door showed clear signs of forced entry. The lock plate was scratched and bent, and there were pry marks on the door frame. She hadn't been subtle. Inside, the cabin was warm. The fire in the stone fireplace had burned down to glowing embers, but heat still radiated through the open floor plan. My living room looked like someone had been camping in it. The leather couch had an expensive wool blanket draped across it, one I kept in the upstairs bedroom. Empty food wrappers sat on the coffee table next to an open can of soup and a dirty spoon. She had made hot chocolate with my expensive imported cocoa and left the mug on the mantel without a coaster, leaving a ring on the wood. Officer Thompson followed me as I walked through the space. She was here for at least an hour before the alarm brought us. The system shows she entered at 1:38 p.m. She somehow delayed the alarm notification. How is that possible? It's supposed to alert immediately. We're not sure yet. The security company is investigating. She might have found the control panel and entered a delay code, but she would have needed your master code for that. That made my blood run cold. I never gave her any codes. The only people who have access are me and my brother in case of emergency. Could she have gotten it from him? No way. Harrison lives in Seattle and has never even met her. I stared at the control panel near the door. It showed a successful disarm and rearm cycle from approximately 2:30 p.m., right before the alarm finally triggered. She must have found my emergency code. I walked to the kitchen where I kept a fireproof safe mounted inside a cabinet. The safe was closed but not locked. Inside was my emergency information binder, which included alarm codes, insurance documents, and utility company contacts. I had never imagined someone would break in and look for it. She went through my safe, I told Officer Thompson, showing him the unsecured door. This is always locked. She must have pried it open. He documented it with photos and notes. That elevates the charges. She didn't just break in for shelter. She actively searched your property. We continued the walk through. Upstairs, my bedroom door was open. I always closed it. She had gone through the dresser drawers. In my office, papers on my desk had been moved. She had been snooping. What was she looking for? I muttered. Officer Thompson shrugged. In my experience, HOA disputes can get weirdly personal. Maybe she was trying to find something to use against you, proof of a business, code violations, anything to validate her complaints. That's insane. You'd be surprised what people justify to themselves when they think they're in the right. After finishing the property assessment, I drove down to the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office in Sandy, about 20 minutes north. The small station was warm and busy with deputies coming and going, tracking snow across the floors. Deputy Martinez met me in the lobby. He was a stocky man in his 40s with a weathered face that suggested he'd spent most of his career in mountain patrol. He shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Williams, thanks for coming down. We've processed Miss Henderson and she's currently in holding. She's been read her rights and has requested a lawyer, so we can't question her further, but I wanted to walk you through what we know." He led me to a small office and pulled up body camera footage on a computer. The video showed two deputies approaching my cabin, weapons drawn but lowered. They announced themselves and knocked. After no response, they tested the door, which opened easily. The interior footage showed Patricia Henderson on my couch, wrapped in my blanket, holding a mug. She looked startled but not particularly afraid. She was exactly as I remembered. Late 50s, blonde hair cut in that aggressive bob that seemed required for HOA board members, wearing expensive outdoor gear from REI that looked brand new. "What are you doing in my house?" one deputy said. "This is an HOA inspection," Patricia replied, her voice carrying that imperious tone I'd heard so many times. "I'm the president of Mountain Ridge HOA and I have authority to inspect properties for code compliance and safety issues." "Madam, This property isn't part of Mountain Ridge HOA. You're trespassing. That's incorrect. All properties in this area fall under our jurisdiction for community standards. Madam, I need you to stand up and put the mug down. You're being detained for breaking and entering. The video showed Patricia's expression shift from confident to shocked to angry in rapid succession. I will not. I have every right to be here. This property owner has been ignoring our legitimate complaints for months. Someone needs to inspect this cabin to ensure it meets basic standards. Stand up now or you will be placed under arrest. Patricia had stood then, still clutching the blanket around her shoulders. This is outrageous. I drove up here to check on properties after the storm and my car was having trouble. I needed to warm up. It's a matter of safety. Your car is running fine, madam. It was making a noise. The arrest had gone downhill from there. Patricia had continued arguing even as she was cuffed, insisting the deputies were making a huge mistake and that she had the full backing of the Mountain Ridge HOA board and their lawyers. Deputy Martinez paused the video. She maintained this story the entire drive to the station, kept saying you were the one breaking the law by not complying with community standards. She genuinely believes she has authority over my property, I said, shaking my head. I've tried explaining it to her. My lawyer has sent letters. The county has dismissed her complaints, but she won't accept it. Unfortunately, her belief doesn't make breaking into your cabin legal. We're charging her with criminal trespass in the first degree, burglary in the second degree, and criminal mischief for the damage to your door and safe. The prosecutor will make final charging decisions, but given the evidence, I expect these will stick. What happens now? She'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. A judge will set bail. Given that this is her first arrest and she's not a flight risk, she'll likely be released on her own recognizance or a small bail. But she'll have conditions, including a restraining order preventing her from contacting you or going near your property. Good. I should warn you, people like this don't usually back down gracefully. She's going to fight this, and she might escalate before she accepts consequences. I thanked Deputy Martinez and drove back up to my cabin as darkness fell. The snow had finally stopped, leaving everything coated in fresh white. Under different circumstances, it would have been beautiful. Instead, I spent the evening changing locks, updating alarm codes, and adding additional sensors to my security system. I called my brother Harrison that night to fill him in. She actually broke into your cabin. Is she delusional? Harrison's voice carried the same disbelief I'd felt all day. Apparently she thinks being HOA president gives her some kind of universal property access. That's not how anything works. Dad would have lost his mind. Remember how he dealt with that HOA in Beaverton when they tried to fine him for his garden? I smiled despite the situation. Our father had been a real estate attorney who had zero tolerance for HOA overreach. He'd fought that particular battle all the way to court and won, establishing case law that limited HOA authority in Oregon. He'd passed away 4 years ago, but I could imagine his reaction to Patricia Henderson's antics. I wish he was here to handle this, I admitted. He would have buried her in legal documents. You've got David Chen, though. He's good. Yeah, but this feels different. This isn't just legal harassment anymore. She physically broke into my home. I don't feel safe here. Come stay with me in Seattle for a few days. Let the legal process work. I can't. I have work, and I'm not letting her chase me out of my own cabin. We talked for another hour, Harrison helping me process the violation I felt. Having someone break into your home leaves you feeling exposed and angry. The fact that it was Patricia, who I'd been dealing with for nearly 2 years, made it worse. This felt like an escalation in a conflict I'd never wanted to be part of. The next morning, I drove back to Sandy for the arraignment. The courthouse was a modest building that served the county's more rural areas. I sat in the gallery watching other cases cycle through. Patricia appeared at 10:30 a.m., flanked by a lawyer in an expensive suit, who introduced himself as Leonard Morrison from a Portland firm specializing in civil litigation. The judge, an older woman named Barbara Thornton, reviewed the charges. Patricia stood stiffly, her expression suggesting she was the victim of a grave injustice. "Miss Henderson, you're charged with criminal trespass in the first degree, a Class C felony, burglary in the second degree, a Class C felony, and criminal mischief in the second degree, a misdemeanor." "How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Morrison said smoothly. "My client entered the property in her capacity as HOA president, conducting legitimate inspections during dangerous weather conditions. This is a gross misunderstanding of her authority and responsibilities." Judge Thornton looked unimpressed. "Mr. Morrison, is the property in question part of the Mountain Ridge HOA? The property is adjacent to the development and subject to community standards." "That's not what I asked. Is it a member property?" Morrison hesitated. "The boundaries are disputed." "They're not disputed," I said loudly from the gallery. "My property is fully documented as outside the HOA." The judge looked at me. "You're the property owner?" "Yes, Your Honor, Henry Williams." "That property is mine, free and clear, purchased outside the HOA specifically to avoid their jurisdiction. Mr. Williams, you'll have opportunity to speak if you choose to provide a victim impact statement. For now, please remain quiet." But her tone wasn't harsh. She turned back to Morrison. "Counsel, unless you can provide documentation right now proving HOA authority over this property, your client's justification is irrelevant to these charges." Morrison couldn't. The judge set bail at $5,000, with conditions including no contact with me and a prohibition against going within 500 feet of my property. Patricia's face flushed red as the terms were read. She whispered urgently to Morrison, who shook his head. As I left the courthouse, Morrison caught up with me in the parking lot. "Mr. Williams, can we speak for a moment?" I stopped but didn't move toward him. "What?" "My client has been under significant stress. The HOA has been facing challenges with property value concerns and compliance issues. She made a serious error in judgment, but I believe we can resolve this without proceeding to trial. She broke into my cabin. She sought shelter during a dangerous storm. Yes, she should have called you first, but her intentions weren't criminal. She pried open my safe and went through my personal documents." Morrison's expression flickered. "We can make this right. What would it take for you to drop the charges? The HOA is prepared to compensate you for damages and legal fees." "No, Mr. Williams, be reasonable. A trial will be expensive and time-consuming for everyone. Miss Henderson is a respected member of the community with no prior record. A conviction would destroy her life over what amounts to a misunderstanding about property authority." "It's not a misunderstanding. She's been harassing me for 2 years. She knows she has no authority over my property because I've told her, my lawyer has told her, and the county has told her. She chose to break in anyway. That's not a misunderstanding. That's criminal behavior. Think carefully about this. The Mountain Ridge HOA has significant resources and influence in this county. Making an enemy of them could complicate your life." I stepped closer to Morrison, close enough to see his eyes widen slightly. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check." "Here's my reality check. Your client committed multiple felonies. She's going to face the consequences. And if the HOA wants to complicate my life further, I'll sue them into oblivion for harassment and any damages that result. My father was a real estate attorney." I grew up learning exactly how to fight HOA overreach. Tell Patricia and her board that they should be very careful about their next moves." I walked away before Morrison could respond. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from anger. The audacity of trying to intimidate me into dropping charges was stunning. David Chen called me that afternoon after hearing about the arraignment from the prosecutor's office. "Leonard Morrison is a pit bull," he warned. "He's expensive and he doesn't lose often. The fact that the HOA hired him suggests they're taking this seriously." "Good. So am I. Morrison will try to make a deal. He'll argue Patricia was confused about her authority, that it was a civil matter that accidentally became criminal, that she panicked in bad weather. He'll paint her as sympathetic. "She broke into my house, David. She went through my things." "I know, and the evidence is solid, but juries can be unpredictable, especially with middle-aged women who present well. Morrison knows how to play that. What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm preparing you for what's coming. This is going to get ugly." Morrison's threat about the HOA making things difficult wasn't empty. "They can't touch your property rights, but they can make living near them uncomfortable. Code enforcement complaints, noise complaints, access disputes, death by 1,000 cuts. Let them try. I'll document everything and add it to the harassment case." "That's the spirit. I'm drafting a civil suit against the HOA now, separate from the criminal charges. We'll argue Patricia was acting in her capacity as HOA president when she broke in, making the organization liable. We'll seek damages for harassment, emotional distress, property damage, and legal fees. That should get the board's attention." "How much are we talking?" "I'm thinking we start with 200,000 and negotiate from there. The goal is to hurt them enough that they rein Patricia in and leave you alone." Over the next week, the situation escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. First, the local newspaper ran a story about the arrest. The headline read, "HOA President Arrested After Entering Property During Storm." The article was relatively neutral, presenting both sides, but the comments section online was a war zone. The Mountain Ridge community rallied around Patricia, painting me as an unreasonable newcomer who didn't respect community values. People who had never met me called me everything from selfish to dangerous. Then, I started receiving threatening letters. They came to both my Portland address and the cabin. Anonymous, but clearly from HOA supporters. The messages were vague enough to avoid direct threats, but made it clear I wasn't welcome. "Leave before you regret it. The mountain doesn't want you here. Accidents happen to people who don't fit in." I turned them all over to Deputy Martinez, who took them seriously. He increased patrols near my cabin and opened an investigation into the threats. "This is witness intimidation at minimum," he said. "If we can trace any of these to Patricia or HOA board members, it significantly strengthens the criminal case." But the threats were too generic to trace. Printed on common paper, no return address, mailed from different locations. Whoever was sending them knew how to avoid getting caught. Then the HOA filed a lawsuit against me. Morrison sent the paperwork with a smug cover letter. They were suing for defamation, claiming my statements to the press and to law enforcement had damaged Patricia's reputation and the HOA's standing in the community. They wanted $50,000 in damages. David Chen actually laughed when I forwarded him the documents. "This is desperation. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation, and everything you've said is documented fact. This is a slap suit, designed to intimidate you into dropping the criminal charges through legal pressure." Can they do that? They can file it. It won't survive a motion to dismiss. Oregon has strong anti-slap statutes. Not only will we get this thrown out, but we can petition for attorney fees. They'll end up paying for their own failed intimidation attempt. Despite David's confidence, the lawsuit worried me. I was facing criminal proceedings, a civil harassment case, and now defending against defamation claims. The legal fees were mounting. I had good insurance and savings, but this was becoming expensive and consuming. I took a week off work and stayed at the cabin, partly to prove I wouldn't be intimidated, partly to feel close to something my father had taught me about standing your ground. The cabin had been my escape, my peace. Now it felt like a fortress under siege. On Friday evening, I was reading by the fireplace when my security system alerted to motion near the property line. The cameras showed a figure in dark clothes moving through the trees. I immediately called 911. "Someone's on my property," I told the dispatcher, watching the camera feed on my phone. "I have a restraining order against someone who broke in last week. This might be her. Stay inside and away from windows. Deputies are en route." The figure moved closer. As it passed under an exterior light I'd installed, I caught a glimpse of the face. Not Patricia. A younger man, maybe 30, wearing all black. He approached the cabin cautiously, clearly not realizing he was being recorded. He carried something in his hands. When he got close enough, I realized it was a can of spray paint. He started painting something on my truck. I couldn't see what from the camera angle, but the hissing sound carried in the quiet night. Then he moved to my cabin wall. Deputy Martinez arrived with another unit, lights off. They caught the guy mid-spray, red-handed. The subsequent arrest was quick and angry. The man, identified as Trevor Henderson, was Patricia's son. The graffiti on my truck read, "Go home." On the cabin wall, he'd managed leave while before being interrupted. The rest was just streaks where he'd jerked the can away when the deputies grabbed him. Trevor tried to claim he was just hiking and got lost. Hard to explain the spray paint and being 20 feet from my front door. Harder to explain when deputies found 3 more cans in his backpack along with a printout of my property boundaries. "Did your mother send you?" Deputy Martinez asked. "I want a lawyer." They arrested him for criminal mischief, trespassing, and violating the restraining order by proxy. But the bigger issue was what his arrest implied about Patricia's behavior while out on bail. David Chen was gleeful. "This is perfect." "Well, not perfect for you, but perfect for our case. Patricia's son just demonstrated that the harassment is ongoing and organized. If she directed him, she violated her bail conditions. Even if she didn't directly tell him to do this, it shows the family's mindset and pattern of behavior." The prosecutor agreed. At a bail hearing Monday morning, they argued Patricia should be remanded to custody pending trial given the escalating pattern of harassment. Morrison fought hard, insisting Patricia had nothing to do with Trevor's actions and couldn't be held responsible for her adult son's choices. Judge Thornton was skeptical. "Mr. Morrison, your client is accused of breaking into Mr. Williams' property. Now her son is caught vandalizing it. You're asking me to believe that's coincidence. My client has strictly adhered to her bail conditions. She's had no contact with Mr. Williams and has stayed away from his property." "Has she had contact with her son?" Morrison hesitated fatally. "She's his mother, Your Honor. She can't be prohibited from speaking to family." "Did she tell him not to harass Mr. Williams?" "I would have to consult with her." "That's what I thought. Bail is revoked. Miss Henderson will remain in custody pending trial." Patricia's face went white. She grabbed Morrison's arm, whispering urgently. He shook his head, looking frustrated. As they led her away, Patricia turned and looked directly at me. The hatred in her eyes was chilling. "This isn't over," she said loud enough for the courtroom to hear. "You don't belong here. You'll never belong here." "Miss Henderson, that's enough," Judge Thornton said sharply. One more outburst and I'll add contempt charges. Trevor's arrest opened new avenues for the investigation. His phone was seized as evidence, and it contained text messages from Patricia. Nothing directly incriminating, but suggestive. That man is destroying our community. Someone needs to make him understand he's not welcome. I can't do anything because of these ridiculous bail conditions, but I wish I could. A good lawyer could argue that wasn't directing criminal activity. David Chen saw it differently. She's clearly expressing desire for someone to act against you, then her son acts against you. That's conspiracy. The prosecutor agreed to add charges. Patricia was now facing her original crimes plus conspiracy to commit criminal mischief and witness intimidation. The trial was set for March, about 6 weeks away. That gave both sides time to prepare. Morrison filed motions to suppress evidence, to dismiss charges, and to sever the conspiracy charges from the original case. David filed our civil suit against both Patricia personally and the Mountain Ridge HOA for $250,000, having raised the amount based on the escalating harassment. The discovery process was enlightening. We subpoenaed HOA records and found that Patricia had been documenting her complaints about my property in official board minutes. She'd even gotten the board to vote on declaring my cabin a community concern and authorizing inspection measures to ensure compliance. David was ecstatic. They documented their conspiracy. The board authorized her to take action against your property. This makes the entire HOA liable. We also discovered Patricia had a history of aggressive enforcement against other properties. There were 3 pending lawsuits from other homeowners claiming harassment. She'd been accused of entering properties without permission before, but never arrested. Apparently, previous property owners had been too intimidated or too tired to press charges. "She's done this before," Deputy Martinez said when I met with him to review evidence. "She's just used to people backing down. You're the first one to hold firm." Why didn't other victims pursue charges? HOA disputes are complicated. People want to avoid conflict with neighbors. They worry about property values if they are in a public fight. They just want peace. She counts on that. I understood that impulse, but I was too angry to let it go. Patricia had violated my home, my sanctuary. She'd sent her son after me. She tried to intimidate me through lawsuits and threats. Every instinct said fight. In late February, Morrison reached out to David with a settlement offer. Patricia would plead guilty to misdemeanor trespassing, pay for damages, and accept a permanent restraining order. In exchange, we dropped the felony charges and the civil suit. What do you think? I asked David. It's a terrible deal. She committed felonies. She should face felony consequences. The civil suit has merit and will likely succeed. Taking this deal lets her off easy. Would a trial be risky? Somewhat. Juries are unpredictable. Morrison will paint Patricia as a dedicated community servant who made a mistake. He'll emphasize the weather, suggest she panicked, minimize the safe searching and snooping. Some jurors might sympathize, but we have strong evidence. The security footage is damning. The text messages to Trevor help. Her history of harassment matters. What would you do? David considered. Personally, I'd reject the offer and go to trial. She needs to face real consequences or she'll never stop. But I'm not the one who has to live with the outcome. You need to decide what you can handle. I thought about it for days. Part of me wanted to accept the deal, to end the stress and move on with my life. But every time I leaned that way, I remembered the look on Patricia's face in the courtroom, the hatred in her eyes, her insistence that I didn't belong. I called David on a Tuesday morning. "Reject the offer. We're going to trial." "You sure?" "Completely." She broke into my home. She needs to understand that has real consequences. The trial began on March 15th, a cold Monday morning with frost still clinging to the courthouse windows. I sat in the gallery with my brother Harrison, who had driven down from Seattle to support me. David Chen handled our civil case, but the criminal prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Melissa Crawford, a sharp woman in her 40s with a reputation for thorough preparation. Morrison's opening statement painted Patricia as a victim of misunderstanding. Patricia Henderson has dedicated 15 years to the Mountain Ridge community, working tirelessly to maintain property values and community standards. On January 20th, she was conducting inspections after a severe storm when her vehicle experienced mechanical difficulties. Scared, cold, and worried about hypothermia, she sought shelter in the nearest structure, which happened to be Mr. Williams' cabin. She used her knowledge of standard security systems to access the building, intending to wait safely until help arrived. Instead of gratitude for her years of community service, she was arrested and charged with serious felonies. This is a tragedy of miscommunication and overzealous prosecution. Crawford's opening was more direct. The evidence will show that Patricia Henderson deliberately drove to Mr. Williams' property with the intention of entering his cabin without permission. She forced open the door, searched his belongings, and made herself comfortable. She had no authority to be there. Her car was functioning perfectly. This wasn't a scared woman seeking emergency shelter. This was someone who believed her position gave her the right to ignore property laws. And when she was caught, her family continued harassing Mr. Williams, showing this wasn't an isolated mistake, but part of a pattern of entitlement and harassment. The prosecution's case took 2 days. Crawford presented the security footage showing Patricia prying open the door. She walked the jury through the timeline, demonstrating Patricia had been in the cabin for over an hour before the delayed alarm triggered. Experts testified about the security system and how someone would need knowledge of the master codes to delay the notification. The damaged safe and searched documents were cataloged. My testimony described the ongoing harassment from Patricia and the HOA. Deputy Martinez testified about Patricia's behavior during arrest and her continued insistence that she had authority over my property. Trevor's arrest came in as evidence of ongoing harassment. His text messages from Patricia were read aloud. Several jurors looked troubled when they heard her say, "I wish I could make me understand I wasn't welcome." Morrison's cross-examination tried to poke holes. He suggested I was oversensitive about HOA concerns. He implied I'd moved to the area specifically to antagonize the Mountain Ridge community by refusing to conform to their standards. He questioned whether Patricia might have genuinely believed she had inspection authority based on confusing county ordinances. I held firm in my answers. I purchased property outside the HOA specifically to avoid their jurisdiction. I've repeatedly told Miss Henderson she has no authority over my cabin. This isn't confusion. It's willful disregard of property law. But you do live adjacent to a community that values certain standards, Morrison pressed. Isn't it reasonable that they would want neighboring properties to maintain similar standards? Want, sure, enforce through illegal break-ins? Absolutely not. On the 3rd day, Patricia took the stand. Morrison had coached her well. She appeared remorseful, speaking softly about her dedication to the community and how the stress of dealing with property value concerns had affected her judgment. "I did enter Mr. Williams' cabin without permission," she said, her voice trembling. "I was wrong to do that. I thought I was helping, ensuring the property was safe after the storm, but I should have called him first. I'm deeply sorry for the violation he feels." Crawford's cross-examination was surgical. "Miss Henderson, you said you entered to check on the property after the storm. But the storm had been ongoing for 3 days. Why check Mr. Williams' property on January 20th specifically? I was in the area." "Where were you coming from?" "I had been checking other properties." "Other properties in Mountain Ridge HOA?" "Yes." "Did you enter any other properties that day?" Patricia hesitated. "No." "So you entered only Mr. Williams' property, the one property not under your jurisdiction?" "I believed it needed inspection." "Based on what?" "You couldn't see inside from the road. The cabin is set back in the trees." "I had concerns about maintenance standards." "Miss Henderson, isn't it true you've sent Mr. Williams dozens of complaints over the past 2 years, all of which have been dismissed because you have no authority over his property?" "We had legitimate concerns." "Concerns that you had no legal right to enforce." "Community standards matter." "Answer the question. Did you have legal authority to enter Mr. Williams' property?" Patricia's lawyer objected, but Judge Thornton overruled it. Patricia sat silently for a long moment before finally saying, "I believed I did." "Despite being told repeatedly by Mr. Williams, his lawyer, and county officials that you did not, I thought they were wrong." Crawford presented documents showing Patricia's previous complaints, and the county's responses clearly explaining she had no jurisdiction. She presented the HOA board minutes showing Patricia had been specifically advised by the HOA's own lawyer that they couldn't enforce standards on non-member properties. "You knew you had no authority," Crawford said. "You simply decided to take matters into your own hands because Mr. Williams wouldn't bend to your will." Morrison objected strenuously, but the damage was done. Patricia's credibility was shattered. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman read the verdict: guilty on criminal trespass in the 1st degree, guilty on burglary in the 2nd degree, guilty on criminal mischief in the 2nd degree, guilty on conspiracy to commit criminal mischief, not guilty on witness intimidation. Patricia showed no reaction, just sat staring straight ahead as the verdicts were read. Morrison requested she remain free pending sentencing. The judge agreed but maintained the restraining order and added electronic monitoring. Sentencing was set for 2 weeks later. During that time, the civil case moved forward rapidly. The HOA board, seeing the criminal conviction, panicked. 3 board members resigned. The remaining board called an emergency meeting and voted to settle our lawsuit. David negotiated a payment of $175,000 from the HOA's insurance, a formal apology to be published in the local paper, and a permanent agreement that the HOA would have no authority over my property or any communication with me. The board also voted to remove Patricia from her position, which was technically meaningless since she was headed to prison, but symbolically significant. At the sentencing hearing, Judge Thornton listened to impact statements. "I spoke about the violation I felt, the stress and expense, the ongoing harassment. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was deliberate criminal behavior by someone who thought her position put her above the law." Morrison presented character witnesses for Patricia. Neighbors testified she'd been a dedicated HOA president. Her minister spoke about her community involvement. Her daughter cried on the stand describing what a devoted mother Patricia was. Judge Thornton listened patiently, then delivered her sentence. "Miss Henderson, you committed serious crimes against Mr. Williams. You violated his home, his privacy, and his sense of safety. You did this not out of desperation or necessity, but because you arrogantly believed your position gave you authority you did not possess. The law is clear. HOA authority extends only to member properties. You knew this but chose to ignore it. Then, when you were caught, Your family continued harassing Mr. Williams, suggesting you felt no real remorse. She sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, followed by 3 years of probation. She also ordered restitution for my property damage and legal fees, which came to about $30,000. Patricia finally broke down, sobbing as deputies led her away. Her family and supporters in the gallery cried and shouted about the injustice of it. Morrison immediately filed notice of appeal. I felt no satisfaction, just exhaustion. This battle had consumed 4 months of my life. I'd spent over $40,000 in legal fees, even with the eventual reimbursements. I'd lost sleep, taken time off work, and turned my peaceful cabin into a security fortress. But it was over. Finally over. The appeals process took another year. Morrison argued the sentence was excessive, that the conspiracy charge was unsupported, that evidence should have been suppressed. The Oregon Court of Appeals rejected every argument, upholding the conviction and sentence in full. Patricia served 16 months before being paroled. Part of her parole conditions included staying at least 1,000 feet from my property and having no contact with me. She moved to Idaho shortly after release, her reputation in the community destroyed. The Mountain Ridge HOA elected new leadership that took a notably hands-off approach to neighboring properties. They sent me a fruit basket for Christmas that first year, which was weird, but I appreciated the gesture. The harassment stopped completely. Trevor Henderson pleaded guilty to his charges and got probation plus community service. He apologized in a formal letter his lawyer sent, though I doubted it was sincere. Life slowly returned to normal. I reinforced my security, kept the cameras running, but gradually the cabin felt like mine again. Harrison visited regularly. I started dating someone I met through friends, Gwen, who thought the whole story was insane and impressive in equal measure. "You really took on an entire HOA in one," she said one night sitting by the fire. "I just stood up for my property rights. My dad taught me that matters." Still impressive. Most people would have given up. Patricia was counting on that. 2 years after the break-in, I was splitting firewood behind the cabin when a sheriff's vehicle pulled up. Deputy Martinez climbed out, now sporting sergeant stripes. "Henry, how are you?" he called, walking over. "Good. Everything okay. Just wanted to give you a heads up." Patricia Henderson's parole ended. She's no longer under supervision. My stomach tightened. Should I be worried? I don't think so. Her lawyer reached out to make sure we knew she'd completed all requirements and was moving on with her life. She's still in Idaho, working as a bookkeeper. I think she learned her lesson. "You don't sound convinced," Martinez shrugged. "People surprise you. Some learn, some don't. But she knows what happens if she comes near you again. And honestly, I think serving time broke that entitled attitude she had. Prison has a way of providing perspective." "I hope you're right, me too. But keep your security active and call us if anything seems off. We'll always take your concerns seriously." He left, and I stood there holding an axe, looking at my cabin. Sunlight filtered through the Douglas firs, painting everything golden. It was peaceful. It was mine, and I'd fought to keep it that way. I never heard from Patricia again. The Mountain Ridge HOA continued operating, now with reasonable leadership that understood their jurisdiction. My property values increased as the area developed. I eventually married Gwen, and we spent weekends at the cabin with our dog, a German shepherd named Judge after Judge Thornton. Years later, I sometimes told the story to friends over drinks. It always sounded insane in retrospect. An HOA president broke into my cabin, got arrested by surprise, and went to prison for it. The kind of story that could only happen in America, where property rights clash with community associations and homeowner politics. But it taught me valuable lessons about standing firm in the face of bullying, about not backing down when you're right, and about the importance of documentation and legal preparation. My father would have been proud. The cabin remains my sanctuary. The door lock that Patricia damaged is framed on my wall now, a reminder of that winter day when everything changed. Sometimes justice is simple. Someone breaks the law, they face consequences. Sometimes standing your ground means accepting conflict instead of seeking peace. I don't regret any of it. Patricia Henderson learned that HOA authority has limits, that property law matters, and that breaking into someone's home has serious consequences. The Mountain Ridge community learned that HOA power isn't absolute. And I learned that security systems with direct sheriff notification are worth every penny. The mountains around government camps still get heavy snow every winter. The cabin stays warm. The alarm stays active. And I sleep soundly knowing that my property is truly mine, protected by law and defended by someone willing to fight for it. Some people called me stubborn for not accepting Patricia's settlement offer. Maybe they were right, but I called it principled. My father called property rights sacred, and he taught me they are only as strong as your willingness to defend them. Patricia Henderson broke into my cabin thinking her position as HOA president granted her authority she never possessed. She discovered the hard way that it didn't. That discovery cost her freedom, reputation, and her position. Those are heavy prices, but they are the prices the law demands for violating someone's home. I hope she found peace in Idaho. I hope she learned from her mistakes. But mostly, I hope she never forgets that the law applies equally to everyone, even HOA presidents who think they're above it. As for me, I'm sitting in my cabin right now, fire crackling, dog at my feet, wife reading beside me. The security system is armed. The cameras are recording. And I am absolutely, completely, legally at peace in my home. That's justice. That's home. And that's worth fighting for.